begin with, I would like to ask everyone to please. My name is Saeed Ganji, and I'm the president and the chairman of the National Union for Democracy in Iran. NUFDI is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization of Iranian Americans based in Washington, D.C., dedicated to human rights, democracy, and rule of law in Iran. As a nonpartisan organization, I must tell you that we have invited congressmen and elected officials from across the aisle to attend our forum and have had the pleasure of hosting many from GOP. Unfortunately, our Democratic friends have been less willing to sit down with us. Perhaps our distinguished guest can enlighten us as to what's happening in the Democratic caucus. Our main goal is to mobilize the Iranian American community to amplify the voice of Iranian people who have been silenced for more than 4 decades. We're honored to be able to do that today with one of the country's most respected leader on foreign policy and an American hero, Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Mr. Crenshaw graduated from Tufts University in 2006, where he received his BA and earned his Naval Officer Commission through Navy ROTC. Then deployed to Fallujah, Iraq, and joined SEAL Team 3, his first of 5 deployments overseas. On Dan's 3rd deployment in 2012, his life changed forever. After 6 months of combat operations, he was hit by an IED blast during the mission in Helmand province in Afghanistan. He was evacuated and awoke from his medically induced coma, learning that his right eye has been destroyed in the blast and his left eye was badly damaged. Dan was completely blind, and the doctors did not believe that he would ever see again. After several difficult surgeries and months of fighting a tough diagnosis, Mr. Crenshaw eventually regained sight in his left eye, which was nothing short of a miracle. He was medically retired in September 2016 as a lieutenant commander after serving years in the SEALs. He left service with 2 bronze stars. Soon after, Mr. Crenshaw completed his master's in public administration at Harvard Kennedy School of Government. In November 2018, he was elected to represent the people of this Texas 2nd Congressional District. Since he has been active voice of American foreign policy and consistently engaged the Iranian American community in his district. Indeed, today, events was not simply possible without one of his constituents' effort, NUFDI's vice president and the leader in the Houston community, Mr. Shahbaz Razvan. It is my privilege and honor to welcome the Honorable Congressman Dan Crenshaw and thank him in advance for his time, insight, and contributions to our cause. We informed Congressman Crenshaw that Mr. Cameron Conservania, our policy director, will be conducting the fireside chat today. But if he wishes to have someone older, less attractive, with a thick Persian accent, I could do it. His response was, no, I'll stick with Cameron. So thank you so much for being here, Congressman, and Cameron, take it away, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ganji. Congressman, thank you, sir. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I think we overlapped in some time in Cambridge, but I think we had some different social circles. You were running with all the badass former military people, and I was.
Were you at HKS?
Undergrad.
Undergrad.
I was with the much less cool crowd that I'm sure you were hanging out with. But we're very excited.
I don't know. There's like a 50% admission rate to HKS. It's like 1% undergrad. So
no,
I wouldn't say it's the cooler crowd.
You certainly earned it with all what you've done for our country, and again, thank you for your service. Congressman, you've been generous with your time today, but Congress is in session, so we're going to be respectful of your time and jump right in. And I want to talk first and foremost, sir, about really current events and what we just saw as a nation in Afghanistan. I saw an interview or commentary you recently had that unlike what many are saying, the war is not over. We're just trying to kid ourselves, or some of us are trying to kid ourselves that the war on terror is over, but they're very much still at war with us. How do you think things in Afghanistan went so wrong at the end, sir?
Well, because of slogans, because of emotional slogans. That is the genesis of all of the foreign policy problems in the Middle East, with respect to the American perspective, and maybe a little bit the European, maybe the Western perspective. You know, there's this impatience. You're from the Middle East. You have a lot more patience. I think history lives within people a lot more. I don't know how to describe that. I think but you sense it. It's true. They think very long term, and it's even in personal meetings. You know, you do operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's so un-American because in America we want things. I want a conclusion figured out immediately. Like I want something to come from this meeting. Right. It's not how it works in the Middle East. I might just smoke cigarettes for 3 hours. And I'm like, what did I get out of that? Oh, nothing, but we like each other more. And, you know, we do that to an extent in the US, business networking, of course, but it's a very different culture. And so Americans are very impatient. We want some results. We want to understand it. And I think for years, our leaders didn't explain the reason we were over there. We didn't explain why we should stay after day one in Afghanistan. So let's put Iraq into a different category because it's a little bit more debatable. But Afghanistan, everybody wanted to go. There was no debate really. You know, day one, we should go. And day two, there's a debate. Do you stay? You kick some ass, do you stay? Right. Or do you go? Now, that's a worthy debate to have, but we consistently came down on the side of, well, if we just leave, you just put you reset the conditions that caused 9/11. So why would you do that? And is that an endless war? I mean, I guess it is. I guess it is, but they're at war with us whether we like it or not. Right. You know, we weren't at war with them on September 10th, 2001, but they were at war with us. So they were at war with us well before that, and they're still at war with us now. They're reconvening. Al Qaeda is, ISIS is. They're reconvening. They're gathering their strength, and they have all this space and this time. They have loads of cash. They have some weapons, and they just have freedom. I mean, they're just it's a terrorist Disneyland for them, and this is always what they wanted, and we could pretend like what they're going to do with that newfound freedom is to, you know, build ivory towers and democracies. We could, or leave us, or at the very least leave us alone. But of course, that's not what they do. And so it's the reason we made these mistakes is this naive sloganeering of no more endless wars, bring the troops home. You know, it makes people feel better. It makes people feel moral to want to protect our troops, as if our troops are these victims that just didn't know what they were getting into, which is just nonsense. So it was a lot of idealism and naivete that led to this, and it was both sides, Republicans and Democrats. I bash people on the right who dare to criticize Biden. I mean, Biden did what you wanted. You said no more endless wars, Tucker Carlson. So this is what you got. You can't complain about it now. Right. And there was no how. There was no better how. If you go to zero troops, this was going to happen. I don't care how you did it. There is no good way to get zero troops out, because the moment that they're all out, Taliban take over. We always knew this was happen. It was in the intel reports. Military advised Biden not to do it. Now look, Trump woke up every day and was like, get him out. But then he listened to his advisors and he changed his mind every day of his administration. So, you know, yeah, he had the same instincts, but he also listened. Biden didn't listen. And we're in a disaster now, and our allies are pissed off. I mean, you know, people who continuously interact with our allies, whether it's in Europe or Asia, they're very angry and disappointed. They can't believe what they saw. They weren't properly consulted. This is how they feel, and I don't know why they would feel any different. It's very frustrating.
And you talk about sort of the sloganeering and sort of just the, you know, the easy tweet, you know, foreign policy, and you also mentioned that it's found on the left and the right. I want to just, if I can for a bit, talk about this, what I think is an increase in isolationism in our foreign policy. I think we probably saw it start on the left, and then, as you put it, it's come to the right, whether it's TV talking heads or people who think it's an easy slogan. What do you think is the way forward for our foreign policy? How did this come about? Is there a way that we can get back to having some, I think, as you put it recently, a middle ground between, nation building and simply staying at home and doing nothing?
Yeah. And to be fair, America has a long history of isolationist tendencies. It was tough to get us into World War I. It was tough to get us into World War II. I mean, it took a lot. It took us Pearl Harbor being bombed.
Right.
And that was, that was after our ships were being sunk by Nazi U-boats. So it took a lot for us to get involved. And then there was this era of increased interventionism with mixed results. And isolationists would call them all just abrupt failures. Well, that's a bit of a tough case to make because you don't know what would have happened otherwise. Right. So, I mean, look, it can be argued forever, and it's a perfectly debatable subject whether Vietnam ended up being worth it for us or not. Right. Whether Grenada, well, that was a pretty good one, but there's plenty of examples of interventionism, and Americans seem generally okay with it, but the pendulum swung pretty far with a two-front war in Iraq and Afghanistan, hundreds of thousands of troops, trying to build a democracy. And is that a futile goal? I mean, yes and no. We should have set more realistic expectations. We shouldn't have said, look, we want this Jeffersonian democracy. What we should have said is, we just want a stable partner that we can partner with so that we can leave and they can continue doing counterterrorism operations. Right. That would have been a more clear objective for the American people to understand, and we just never gave it to them. And so when the pendulum swings that far one way, it always swings really far the other way. That's why you're seeing these strains of isolationism. It's very reactionary. The American public, unfortunately, likes to see things in very black and white terms. Nuance is very difficult in public conversations. In an era where the average time that somebody reads something is 7 seconds. So that means they read the headline, maybe. Yeah. And then they react emotionally, and then they yell at me on Twitter. So this is how it goes. Yeah.
So can I ask you, because you're a member of the House, you're extremely active in your own district. You're not one of these, I think, folks who comes to DC and just stays here and ignores what your constituents said. From what we've seen, what our friends and members in Houston tell us, they see a good amount of you back in the district. How do you explain why it's important for America to play a role? And I'm not talking specifically Iraq or Afghanistan, but broadly, because as you say, it is very easy for people to fall into this. Okay, we've got a bunch of problems here. Social Security is, maybe bankrupt, this, that. How do you back in your district talk to regular folks maybe who don't know people who are in the service, that America does have some role to play sometimes in the world?
It's tough. I mean, I say a lot of the same things I just said in these last couple answers. It depends on what their concerns are, of course. The question of how to persuade somebody is always very dependent on who you're talking to and where they're coming from. But the truth is, I'm never asked about these things because, everybody was upset about Afghanistan. So there was like a shock to the American psyche that something went wrong here. Now, people might have different opinions about why it went wrong. And in my job, I felt was to correct those wrong opinions. Because again, a lot on our side, because they wanted zero troops, they wanted no more endless wars. So they would blame the generals. They said, well, the way we did this was so bad. And I said, well, how would you do it? Yeah. How would you do it? How would you get to zero troops? There's no good way. So it's a little bit of just hard truths. That's always how I talk. I actually don't know how to talk any other way except just blunt object. Hard truths.
Did you run into problems with that at the Kennedy School?
Yeah, I wasn't that outspoken at the Kennedy School. It's a good. That's a good question. But and I'll get into that. Sure. But the last thing I'll say though about the public is, foreign policy ranks like 10 on their list. There's so many other things that are right up in people's faces right now, like immigration. Supply chain issues, inflation. We'll wrap it all under the economy. The economy ranks number 1. But even with independence, immigration is in the top 3, economy, and then, healthcare. So these are the things that are always on people's minds. So, the truth is people don't have sophisticated opinions about foreign policy. They just want to feel like things are getting done generally right.
That we're winning.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's that simple. And I don't blame them. I mean, I don't like it when people have strong opinions after not knowing a lot of things, but you can't blame people for not having sophisticated opinions on foreign policy. They're trying to get their kids to school that day. They're worried about getting them to karate practice on time. Like, there's other things that normal people are worried about, besides whether we're doing the right thing to prevent Iran from pursuing a nuclear bomb.
Right.
They have no idea. And so you got to kind of come in with some general acceptance on that. Yeah, the Kennedy School was. I was a conservative. But I didn't like push it on people, so I wasn't threatening to anybody. I don't think. I think I am now to them. So yeah, some of my old friends still talk to me, but yeah, for the most part, kind of lose touch.
So I mean, I think since the time you were there, and this is maybe just slightly off topic, but I'm interested in your view. We've seen this growth of, I mean, if you want to use the term cancel culture, wokeness, whatever, on college campuses. Have you seen that increasingly since your time at HKS? Is that something that you spend any of your time thinking about it? And the reason I ask this is because another thing that I read and see about you is how much you engage young people and how much you work to get them involved in politics, whether it's on foreign policy or everyday issues. Are those two in conflict? Is there something wrong with the universities, and how are they different from the young people that you meet back in your district or around the country?
Well, teenagers are always gonna do stupid things, whether it's try to cancel somebody or shout somebody down. There's nobody more confident in their wrong-headed opinions than a teenager. So it is what it is. And I think it's probably always been that way. But it's the job of administrators and professors to put a stop to it and say, if you're really a liberal, then you have to abide by liberal rules. And these aren't liberal rules. These are leftist, Marxist, authoritarian rules that you want to abide by, or that you want everyone else to abide by. So, I did see it. It was obviously, it was not a good open space to be a conservative, but I'm not going to get canceled necessarily. I mean, it depends on how you conduct yourself, I suppose. But certainly if I was as outspoken as I am now, I think, maybe would have ruffled more feathers. I don't know. It's hard to say. I had a great time there, to be perfectly honest. I mean, and I was definitely outwardly conservative, like, I'd have those conversations, but, it's, people like that are generally willing to have those conversations as long as you're not a threat.
Right.
See, now I'm a threat to them because I'm more outspoken. And so I think their minds have changed. I do remember Betsy DeVos being invited to the forum once, and signs everywhere about her being ridiculous things. I mean, just complete. I think there was about her being a Nazi or something. It's like, this is an old lady that cares about school choice. And she's really rich, but I mean, I don't know, like, what's wrong with her exactly.
Yeah,
So it's gotten ridiculous. I did hear from friends who were there in the programs after me that it was pretty bad again, but I don't know compared to what exactly. They're getting bolder, I think, which is problematic, and it's difficult to reverse that in a lot of these institutions. So,
well, part of the reason I ask is because when we see that on college campuses, it's happening simultaneously. And this was, I think, something that happened in Texas and in Houston, if I'm not mistaken, with the Confucius groups, like these groups that were directly related to the Chinese Communist Party on U.S. campuses. And on the Iran issue, we see a very similar thing. Where you have people affiliated with, the regime who are in academia, and they're journalists, they're scholars, they're all over DC. So how do you think that that foreign influence in our country? I know it was talked a lot about, when President Trump was in office, but now I don't hear it being talked about that much. Is that a serious threat in your view, whether it's from CCP, whether it's from the Islamic Republic in Iran? Is that something that you spend time thinking about, or is that something that we're underappreciating the importance of?
Yeah, no, we spend time thinking about it. And there's some legislation that deals with Confucius Institutes specifically. And off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's certainly on people's minds. It's a really difficult problem to deal with. You either live in a free country or you don't.
Right.
And it's worth tackling. It is a problem that a lot of us, at least in the Republican Party, think about quite often, mostly with respect to the Chinese.
Right.
The Iranians definitely as well, but the Chinese are just this is their strategy, to chip away at you over time, to have, quite possibly hundreds of thousands of assets that report directly to the Communist Party, who are just doing normal jobs and not doing anything illegal. This is why it's difficult. And whether their one mission is to just to get into a company that gives the Chinese some kind of advantage, even if it's all legal. This is their strategy, and they're able to implement that strategy with that top-down authoritarianism that they have. I still think in the long run it's destined to fail, but it's certainly a problem for us in the medium term.
It's funny that the way you describe it is very similar to what we see with the role I think the Islamic Republic plays. We'll follow up with your team afterwards and talk more about that. But on the topic of Iran, in addition to your service in Afghanistan, as Dr. Ganji mentioned, you also served our country in Iraq. And the influence of the Islamic Republic there, the IRGC, the Quds Force, is I think pretty significant. Was that something that you saw during your time of service in Iraq, or after, when you returned to civilian life and came into the Congress?
Yeah, I mean, throughout our career, mostly dealing with Iranian threat networks would be later on in my career, not so much in Iraq. In Iraq, I was in how am I forgetting the large province to the west, Al Anbar, and which is pretty minimal,
not in the south,
Shia influence. So I did spend some time in Basra, but I was so low level, I was just mopping things. Like that was it. But later on in my career, looking at higher level operations just throughout the Gulf and partnering with different Gulf cooperation state countries, you see a lot of it. And for instance, it's in places that Americans probably don't even know about, like Oman and Bahrain. Weapons shipments full of explosives coming in regularly to Bahrain. And why would that be? Maybe it's our giant Navy base there. And so, they're very bold. The Iranians are extremely bold. The RGC is extremely bold. I think much more bold than we ever are, and for good reason. I mean, they don't care about political backlash. Of course, these are considerations we have to take. So, the slightest operation is scrutinized to an extreme extent, which is why it was so nice to see President Trump sort of reset the table with Iran in a way that Obama just never did. I mean, he gave up so much to them, and what Trump did was at least draw some red lines. And the strike on Soleimani was a huge deal as well. It reset our escalation dominance with them. Reset our status of deterrence, and that was a good thing.
When it comes to the Islamic Republic in Iran, I think one thing that certainly a lot of Iranian Americans talk about is, at least to us, based on 42 years, a lot of people fled that regime, came to the U.S., came to Houston, different parts of the country. To them, what's very clear is that this is not like another one of our adversaries or foes that is just trying to find some strategic advantage, or can be dealt with tactically, or there's some strategy you can find out to confront them. They are a revolutionary regime, an anti-American regime, anti-Israeli, all these sort of things. When you're, whether as a soldier or now as a congressman, perhaps more as a congressman, I'd imagine, how do you develop a strategy? How do you confront a regime like that, as long as they're in power, they're not going to want to make peace with our country?
Yeah, it's hard because, they don't operate on within the same frameworks of rationality that Westerners do. I mean, heck, we have the same problems with the Chinese and North Koreans. It's like we just don't understand where they're coming from. It doesn't make sense to us. But it is what it is. So, how do you deal with that? How do you figure out what their intentions are? It's a difficult problem because it is ideological. But at the same time, that they're still incentivized to survive. So at least we can rely on that. We can rely on certain indications that say, but they're not going to do this because it would mean the end of the regime. Like they're radical, but they're not that radical. They're not kamikazes.
They want to stay in power.
Yeah, the staying in power is their ultimate goal. So that at least is a guiding light for our policy, and it's probably how we should think about it. But then you got to be. But then again, the difference between Obama and Trump was Obama's foreign policy was based on his campaign slogan, "Hope and change." And you're just hoping for change if you're just nice. That's honestly what it is, and then Biden is continuing that. You know, if we just reach out and open hands, they'll understand that we're really nice. They don't care. They don't care. They see that as weakness. And so at least Trump just understood them for what they are, is frankly pretty rational actors, but they operate in a real world and realism, you know, real politic. And it's very transactional, and it's based on power dynamics. So, you know, have more power and have more leverage, and you'll get more of what you want. It's that simple.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about the overlaps between, you know, Chinese Communist Party, the Islamic regime in Iran. In both of those countries, you have, and basically China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and then in Iran, you know, the Iranian people. How can the United States, without getting into the messes that, you know, we just talked about earlier in Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, I don't think anyone who talks about Iran really, certainly not us, you know, supports war for regime change. But America has a long history of supporting democratic movements, people struggling for freedom. And as I said, you know, now we have the people of Iran and the people in Hong Kong and Taiwan. How can the United States support people who are struggling for many of the same values that we cherish here as American citizens?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you can add Cuba to that category because there is no appetite for intervention.
Right.
And depending on which country you're talking about, there's no appetite there either. I don't think Iranians want U.S. troops there necessarily. Maybe some do, but it's so that leaves you with scant options. You know, maybe it's moral support should at least be the first thing. It's unfortunate that it's hard to come to agreement on that. And whether it was for the Cubans or whether it was for the Iranians, yeah, I mean, mentioned it in the intro. I don't quite understand where Democrats are coming from on this. Chinese is the same thing. They find it hard to really speak out forcefully against China, and I'm not sure why. I don't see any political benefit for them in taking these stances. It's strange, and you should ask them, and they'll dance around it. They'll just say, "No, of course we do." They talk about out of both sides of their mouth on it. And so, you know, it's tailored to each situation. You know, what should we do for Taiwan? I mean, just arm them to the teeth. I just send as many weapons over there as we can and make it the hardest target possible. Yeah. That's really the only strategy. And also, you know, keep bearing in mind too, you can impact the Chinese a lot with from economic means without going to war with them. So we still have some deterrence against China on these fronts. We just have to be willing to use it. The similar deterrence with Iran, again, we just have to be similar to it, willing to use it. We've allowed oil exports to continue to rise because of China, you know, in the black market. And again, it's easy to stop that by sanctioning Chinese banks or whoever is buying it. So there's just no willingness to. So and I think more consistent support for you know, the Iranian people who are taking to the streets would have been nice. I mean, you know, does that solve the problem? It doesn't seem to.
Well, as you say, it's, you know, it's the first step
Yeah.
in people. And I know when you did so, people really appreciated it. Both your constituents and people in Iran who see that. We have to wrap up very shortly. I just want to see if anyone has a 30-second question they want to ask. And if not, well, okay. Would you mind please just introducing yourself, and then we have to let the congressman get on with his busy schedule.
Sure. Al Hunover. I just wanted to thank you for all your services. And many thanks for your clarity. Most of the subjects that you talked about is just regardless of pride and group and interests. And that really sits really well with me. I have a question. How can you create a win-win situation for America and Iran and their peoples? What I see is that the globalism has destroyed all the Middle East, and it is already in America. And it is, I have a small business, construction business, and I'm seeing that this is happening here and in the Midwest where the jobs are going away. So, and then on the other side, the third thing is that we see the rise of China militarily. And these are all the waste that are coming onto US government shoulders. And who has to pay for it is the taxpayers. How can we find a policy and support that and bring it to fruition where Iran can become US ally again because of its capabilities, economical and military and other things, and take some of the load off of US government and taxpayers in the US.
Yeah, well, it kind of gets to kind of what you asked earlier, which is how do you persuade people that America has any interest abroad and it shouldn't just be completely isolationist? And the answer is whether you like it or not, you live in a global economy. Whether you like it or not, it's a 12-hour flight to the Middle East. So you're in the same region now. Okay, it's not like the 1800s, 1700s. It's just not. We're all in the same region. So it's in America's interest to have allies around the world and a support network. I mean, that's the best confrontation with China is a support network of Asian allies, and it's the best strategy against Iran is a network of allies. And then you have Democrats who are like, but the Saudis killed Khashoggi. Yeah, they did. They did. They're mean. They're not good people. They're not, and they're horrible to women. But I wish the world was different. It is not. We can go write fiction novels about how we wish the world was. And that'd be fun. We could read those, but I have to live in the real world where you have to have allies like the Saudis against the Iranians.
Especially living in the real world, and we've seen those countries there.
Yeah.
I remember at the time of 9/11, in some of the Arab wars in Pakistan, they were celebrating this disaster. Okay, while the Iranian people inside Iran, they were holding candle vigil for the victims of 9/11. There's a big difference between these people.
Yeah, the big difference between Iranian people and the regime too. So I mean, there's no great answer to how you just have a win-win situation with Iran, because I mean the current leadership in Iran views winning very, very differently than what we would view winning as. So there is no middle ground there, right? They want a nuclear bomb. I think that's very clear. They wouldn't be going through all this pain just to have clean nuclear energy. That's expensive. Like it makes no sense whatsoever. But anyway, so until that regime falls, and it's hard to see where that win-win situation comes from. It's very easy to see how the Iranian people, I think, align with American values in most ways. I mean, that's something maybe most Americans don't realize about Iranians. So. Because like you said, I think they were chanting, in their recent protests, they were not chanting death to America, right? It was anti-regime. So it's there's room to work for, room to run there. It's just we need an administration that's willing to do it.
Yeah. Not only that, they chanted, our enemy is right here. They lie when they say it's America. So we thank you, Congressman, for your consistent support on this issue, for, as I said, engaging our community. Thank you for being here today and very generous with your time. We very much appreciate it, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks.